everyone, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to be doing a do's and don'ts for how to draw curly hair. I'm going to be looking at the direction and the structure of a curl, and I'm also going to be showing you guys how to render hair realistically. I've also done another do's and don'ts video for hair, which is more of a general overview of the mistakes people make when drawing hair, so I'll link that up above so that you can check that one out as well. But let's get straight on with today's tutorial with the don'ts first. So the most common mistake that I see people make when they're trying to draw curly hair is they just kind of do this spiraled motion over and over again and hope that it ends up looking realistic. And it really doesn't work like that. You can't just do lots of these spiral motions and hope to get a realistic result. So for curly hair, this is the main mistake. As I said on my other video, I talk about more mistakes for drawing hair, but this really is the main one that I want to talk about. So don't just do these spiraled motions. You need to look at the individual shapes and structures of the hair. So now let's talk about the shape and the direction of the hair and how it kind of works. So you tend to have these horizontal bands that are slightly on a tilt, and these are all quite parallel to each other, so they're going in the same direction. And then between these horizontal bands you have more vertical ones, but again they're also on a tilt, and those are going in the same direction to each other as well. So if you look at reference photos for hair, you will see that all of the curls go in this sort of pattern. Even if some of them are slightly looser curls and some are slightly tighter curls, they will still have this same pattern to them, but the horizontal bands might kind of change their tilt, and same with the vertical ones. So now I'm just drawing more of a curved version of this, and more of a natural version that you'd see if you were doing hair. And again, I'm just going to mark on the direction so that you can see, again, it goes in a similar direction. So with your hair, look at a reference photo. I always recommend having a reference photo when you're trying to do something realistically. It will really help you to see where all the shadows need to go and the highlights. In general, it tends to be that with curls, the highlighted areas are in the middle of the lock of hair, and then each end has a bit more shadow to it to give it that curved look. But again, if you have a reference photo, you can use this as a guide to see what the kind of structure is like and also where the shadows and highlights go. Anyway, let's get on with the do's, and I'll show you how I draw it realistically. So the first thing that I like to do is I like to sketch out the structures of the curl, and instead of doing all these little spiral motions, I'm just drawing the structure. And it's really important not to draw every single strand of hair in. I use two kind of vertical lines to act as a guide, so I get the width of the curl quite similar all the way down. It doesn't have to be exactly the same width for each kind of section of the curl, but kind of keep it similar all the way down. And I just lightly sketched that out, and I tweaked little things just to make sure it was perfect and that I was happy with it. Always make sure that you're trying to get your sketch as accurate and as kind of perfect as you want it to be, so that when you go and shade it, you don't realize that you want to now change something. So again, I spend quite a lot of time tweaking it and adjusting to make sure that I've got the shapes and the direction of the curl like I want it to be. I've got a reference photo so that I can kind of copy that. And once I've done that, I'm just going to go over with a kneaded eraser and kind of lighten that sketch all the way up, because you don't want to see harsh lines when you're doing realism. With realism, there isn't any harsh lines outlining everything, not like there is if you're doing a cartoon kind of style. So with realism, you really don't want any harsh lines, so I like to lighten up the sketch before I go in and do my shading. Now I'm going in with a H pencil, so I'm going in with a light kind of pencil first, and I've listed all of the materials that I'm using in the description below so that you can check them out if you want, but it really doesn't matter what sort of pencils you use. I recommend you have a lighter version, so a H or a HB or even a 2H, and then a more shadowed pencil, so I used a 4B to get the darker shadows so that you just can have some of the difference between your highlights, your midtones and your shadows. And this will really help make it look realistic if you've got that sort of contrast to make the drawing pop. So I'm just going in with that H pencil, and I'm blocking in the direction of each of the little sections of hair. I'm blocking in using the reference photo where the highlights and where the shadows are. Like you can see, the highlights tend to be in the middle of each sort of lock of hair. So now what I'm doing is I'm just going to go throughout the whole of that sort of curl and just use this H pencil to shade each section of the curl using the reference photo. And I like to use lines rather than circular motions because hair is obviously strands of hair. So instead of doing circular motions like I'll do for something like skin, I like to keep it all in really light sort of strands. But I'm not drawing in every single strand, which is really important. Otherwise it won't look realistic. It will just look really wiry. I'm just using these strands to indicate the direction that the hair is going in and also to make some more defined sections of the hair. I'm applying a bit more pressure for the areas that are a bit more shadowed so that I now have a clear view of where the shadows are in the hair and where the highlights are, so that when I go in with the shadowed pencil, I can then add more shadow to these areas and darken them up. So now that I've added that H pencil to the whole of the curl, I'm using a cotton bud, which I'm using to softly blend everything out and just give it more of a smooth kind of tone. I'm merging some of the value onto the highlighted areas and just softening everything out so you don't see all of the little kind of strands of hair that I've done and all of the lines. Now it's just really soft and it looks a bit more realistic. So now I'm going in with the 4B pencil. And again, you can see that this is a different make than the other one. It really doesn't matter what pencils you're using. You can still get similar results to this. And what I'm doing with this 4B pencil is I'm going in and just adding it to the shadowed areas. So I'm looking at the reference photo and I'm just picking out the really dark shadowed areas. So the vertical bands tend to be more shadowed than our horizontal bands. So you'll kind of notice that when you look at different hairstyles, because these are more set back, they're more in shadow, so they are going to be darker. And you can see that I'm doing a lot of the shadow towards the outside edges, so not in the middle of the locks of hair, just on the outside edges. And this creates more of that curved, three-dimensional look. And I'm just going throughout the whole of this curl and doing the same thing just to make it look a bit more contrasty and just to make it pop a bit more. So now that we've done that, again, we've got some very defined lines showing through. So I'm going to go and blend it all out with that cotton bud, and it just softens everything really nicely. And you can still see the lines and kind of the defined clumps of hair that are in the shadowed areas, but it's a much softer look and a much more natural look. And then once I've done this, I'm going back in with that 4B pencil to just keep layering and building up those shadows. So I really like to do everything in layers rather than just trying to do it in one layer and get it all done. I just like to slowly build up the layers, blending between each layer as I go. I'm using a bit more pressure on the really dark areas just to add that contrast and get them as dark as they need to be. And again, I'm going back in with that cotton bud and just soften it out a bit more. You don't have to soften it out in every single area, but I like to do it in the majority of the areas just to create that smooth look and make sure that it's not looking grainy. So now what I'm doing is I'm just adding some little flyaway hairs to help break up the curl to make it look a bit more natural. There tends to be lots of little flyaway hairs. And now the major thing that I'm doing is creating the highlights. So adding these highlights is what's going to make your kind of curl stand out, look even more, kind of make it pop a bit more out the page and just make it look really realistic. So these highlights tend to be towards the middle of each of the sections of curls. So that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at the reference photo and I'm using the kneaded eraser just to lighten up these sections. But it depends on your reference photo as to where these highlights are. You can then use a cotton bud to soften them out if they're a bit too bright. Just add a bit more value to them. And then you can go and lift up the really bright areas to add that sort of variation between your highlighted areas. Now I'm going in with the 4B pencil just to darken up certain areas again. And I'm adding some more flyaway hairs, some more intense ones. They can overlap onto the curl as well. And this just really helps to break everything up. It's normally my final step that I like to do. And I just find that it adds that extra level of realism because everything's not uniformed, especially hair. There tends to be lots of little messy flyaway hairs. So I like to add these to make it look even more realistic. I'm also adjusting things as I go. I might spot things that need to be a bit darker or areas that I need to brighten up a bit more. And it's important to be flexible when you're drawing hair and not just think once one area is complete that you won't need to go and tweak it. If you notice something needs to change, then you need to be able to change it. So now I'm just adjusting a few things. I'm going to be doing some more flyaway hairs in a minute and creating some little loose strands around the curl as well. And I'm using a bit more pressure. You can use a kneaded razor on a few of the flyaway hairs to add that variation, to make some of them look more set back and also to bring some forward. So it adds that nice variation, and again it adds depth to the curl and the drawing. So you can see that the flyaway hairs and these loose strands just really make it look more realistic, as do adding these little white strands on top of the hairstyle. It just breaks everything up and makes it look realistic. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. If you're new to my channel and you enjoyed this tutorial and want to see new videos every single week, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tick that bell icon so that you don't miss out on my future videos. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next tutorial. Bye guys!